Conflict is like the catalyst to compelling dialogue. You can have great dialogue in a scene without it, but dialogue will almost always be better with it. It's no coincidence that the most iconic lines of dialogue are the ones at the highest moment of conflict. It's Blade Runner's Tears in the Rain, Gladiator's I Will Have My Vengeance, Silence of the Lambs' I Ate His Liver, or The Social Network's You Don't Have My Full Attention, You Have the Minimum Amount. If you were to find a list of the most iconic dialogue in movie history, you'd find that most of those lines are delivered at a point where two opposing forces are clashing with tremendous tension. Now, there are several qualities that make up good dialogue, and where better to start than purpose? It is an objective fact that if a line of dialogue does not serve a purpose, it is guaranteed to be bad dialogue. Now, purpose can be served in many ways. It could be expositionary, or serves characterization, it furthers the plot, or makes the viewer laugh. There are a million and one ways a line can serve purpose, but one thing is certainly clear. Every line needs to serve at least one. And the mark of a great writer is writing dialogue which serves several purposes all at the same time. Take this example from Lord of the Rings.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
Now, what purpose does this dialogue serve? Well, firstly, it tells us exactly how Bilbo feels about the other hobbits in his neighbourhood, provided the viewer can unravel the cryptic nature of its phrasing. But it also tells us about Bilbo's character. He's cheeky. He enjoys throwing out riddles, knowing almost nobody will figure them out. So he's a person who enjoys making other people confused, and it gives us the impression that he's quite witty, as well as being quite socially awkward. This one line serves a variety of purposes, and it serves them well, so it's a great line of dialogue. But what is an example of dialogue that fails in this aspect, where it is truly devoid of any meaning?
Hi.
Can I help you?
Yeah, can I have a dozen red roses, please?
Oh, hi, Johnny. I didn't know it was you.
How much is it?
It'll be $18.
Here you go. Keep the change. Hi, doggy.
You're my favorite customer.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Now, analysing why The Room is a terrible movie is like kicking a legless, armless, defenceless man while he's face down in a puddle. It's not exactly hard, but this is a great example of what happens when dialogue, or just a whole scene, serves no purpose. It's hilariously bad, because it's just so boring. Because when you have dialogue that does nothing for a story, your scenes will look a hell of a lot like this one. So you really shouldn't be doing it, unless you're actively trying to make a terrible movie, in which case knock yourself out. Preferably literally. Now, purpose is all well and good, but even a purposeful line can be a terrible one. Take this, for example.
Not a day has gone by when I haven't thought of you. I'm in agony. The thought of not being with you. I can't breathe. I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me. My heart is beating, hoping that that kiss will not become a scar.
Now, what is the purpose this dialogue serves? Well, it tells us Anakin loves Padme. And as an exchange of dialogue, it's, well, forgive my French, it's shit, because great dialogue is far more nuanced than just the purpose it serves. This example is not only unnatural, because it feels incredibly inauthentic, like no human being would ever actually say those words, but that's a topic we'll touch on later in this video, but it also lacks a critical quality that makes good dialogue, well, exactly that. And that's subtext. Now, if you were to ask me, subtext is by far the most important quality that makes good dialogue. It's also by far the hardest part to master. Simply put, subtext is the difference between what a character says and what a character means. I've no doubt you've heard the phrase "on the nose" thrown around whenever we see a particularly clunky line of dialogue. When we as an audience use the phrase "on the nose," what we're really trying to say is it's a moment that lacked the subtext it needed. And let's come up with an example to explain this concept. So let's say you have Steve and Joe. Steve has just found out his father has died, so Joe says to Steve, "Are you alright?" To which Steve replies, I'm fine. Now, of course, Steve isn't really fine. His dad just died. What he's really saying is, I'm not alright. In fact, I feel terrible, but I don't want to talk about it. That right there, that is the subtext of that line when he says, I'm fine. Now, this example really is the most generic example of subtext that you could find, but it's a good example to demonstrate the concept. So, simply put, subtext is the show don't tell rule applied to dialogue. As a definition, subtext is what the character is really saying, minus the words they speak. So when a character says exactly how they feel, so I am really angry at you, or I am really sad right now, I want a hug, said lines can feel jarring because they lack that subtext, or as the layman would say it, they feel on the nose.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
And I think a fantastic example of subtext done well is Hannibal's and Clarice's exchange in Silence of the Lambs. For the entire exchange, they're talking about the serial killer Buffalo Bill, about Clarice's past and Hannibal's paintings, and a myriad of other topics, but really the topics aren't what the characters are discussing, because the whole exchange is really a power struggle. The characters are having a battle of wits, trying to achieve dominance over the other to manipulate them. The conversation is not a conversation, it's more so a chess game of the two moving their pieces, trying to achieve a checkmate to make the other bend to their will. And the fact that they are trying to achieve power over the other is never explicitly said, but it is heavily implied by the camera angles and the way the dialogue is written. In this case, the subtext isn't just in one line, but it's the entire scene as well. And if you wanted to find the polar opposite example, one of subtext done poorly, well, a fantastic example would be this infamous line from Interstellar.
Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
Now, many disliked this line, and they disliked it for a simple reason, because this is a notion that needs to be delivered with subtext, as any theme should be. But the problem with this line is it's Nolan straight up saying to the audience, hey, did you know the theme for this movie is love? That's the problem with this line. It's telling the viewer the themes of the movie in an on-the-nose way, when really such things should be delivered with subtlety. This on-the-nose message broke the illusion of reality for some viewers because it was a little too meta. This actually is a common flaw newer writers often fall for. They will tell instead of show across the board. This applying to dialogue. They will abandon subtext and say exactly what the characters mean on the nose. Not necessarily because they're bad at writing, but because they lack confidence in it, thinking that the themes and the ideas might be just too subtle, so the viewers might miss them. So they might assume the audience lacks the intelligence to see through the lines. This of course doesn't really make for a very entertaining experience for the audience. If anything, it results in a patronising one. Now, none of this is to say that dialogue needs subtext in order to be good. I mean, subtext is great, but look at this example.
No, I am your father.
It's an iconic line, arguably one of the most iconic lines in movie history, and it also just so happens to have zero subtext. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It's just like anything when it comes to storytelling. The rules are just guidelines, and sometimes the most entertaining examples are the ones who break those rules. Now, there's a common myth floating around the writing scene, that good dialogue needs to be realistic. The truth is, that's not entirely wrong, however it is bad advice to give, because if a newer writer went around and took that advice at face value, their dialogue would become unbearably dull. The point being, great dialogue makes the audience think it's authentic, when in reality, if it is truly authentic, it is almost guaranteed to be bad dialogue. Okay, that's a lot to process, so let's break it down. If you were to sit at a dinner table or somewhere in public and listen to a conversation in an attempt to learn about dialogue, you realise something. If you transcribed an everyday conversation into a manuscript, it would almost definitely make for incredibly dull copy. This is an incredibly important distinction. Conversation is not dialogue. The two are entirely separate things. The real sweet spot that all great dialogue writers hit is they write dialogue that feels so real to the audience that they believe it to be authentic, even though there is very little real about it.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Now, that dialogue is iconic, it's fantastic, but how often do you see real people get so mad at a person they point a gun at them and start reciting Bible verses? Now, if the answer to your question is often, then please tell me where you live, because I want to go live there, but in a well-done script, you'll find the characters to be so much more witty than real people. There are no ums or ers or pointless segues. A real conversation is like a winding river, taking twists and turns and often splitting off into entirely new streams, often lacking direction. Often a conversation is never even completed because the topic moves on to something entirely different before a conclusion is reached. But a good dialogue exchange is like a train track, to the point, efficient, and even when your characters go on tangents, that all serves the master purpose of the scene and builds towards that final resolution. Take the opening of Inglourious Basterds, for example. Hans Landa is hunting down a group of Jews and is interrogating the farmer to see if he is hiding them. In the middle of this scene, Hans stops talking about the war and goes on a random tangent about rats, completely unrelated to the purpose of his visit, until the conversation flows further and it turns that he is likening rats to Jews and is saying how by analysing the behaviour of vermin, he can become a better hunter. This plays a part in the outcome of this scene because he says that rats hide beneath the floorboards, which just so happens to be exactly where the Jews are hiding. Even then, in a scene where you might think there is a pointless tangent, it is exactly the opposite and is incredibly relevant. The ability to do that, the ability to have tangents which make the exchange feel real because those kind of segues happen in real life, but then having those tangents fold back into line and serve towards the master purpose of the scene. So in doing that, you deliver that punchy purpose of good dialogue and also generate a sense of authenticity. Now that's great writing, and it's something Tarantino is a master at, and I would talk about him more, but I've already done that video. But I think a great way to distinguish dialogue from reality is this. You know what it's like when you're arguing with a person, the argument finishes, and then 5 minutes later you slap yourself because you just thought of the perfect witty response to the conversation that's already over. Well, in dialogue, there is no 5-minute thinking time. The very second someone says something, that witty response that takes most of us a good few minutes to think of comes straight out.
You didn't have seconds. You had 3 weeks. The universe was created in a third of that time.
Well, someday you'll have to tell us how you did it.
Again, nobody in the real world speaks like that, because nobody is that clever to reply with witty zingers with such ease and immediacy. But damn if it doesn't make for crisp listening, and if it isn't entertaining like nothing else. Now, maintaining the illusion dialogue is real conversation is really a must in any kind of story, whether that be a drama or a romance or a horror or anything in between. But there is one genre, and only one genre, where that rule of the realist illusion can be broken, and that's comedy. That's one of the key differences between a comedy and pretty much every other genre. In every other genre, that veil, that illusion of realism has to be maintained, because if it's not, the film will be less entertaining for it. But in comedy, immersion is not the priority, rather it's the pursuit of creating comedy. Any rule can be broken if doing so generates a genuinely funny moment. This can mean creating bathos or adhering to the most generic of tropes, like having a character who does nothing but deliver exposition, and in a self-aware joke, calling him Basil Exposition.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too.
Yes.
It can mean breaking the fourth wall or breaking any number of cinematic standards, as long as doing so creates good comedy. This all breaks the realist illusion, but it also makes the film a better one. Take this clip from 22 Jump Street, the sequel to 21 Jump Street.
I can't believe the Koreans bought their church back.
Yeah, I mean, good thing there was an even bigger abandoned church directly across the street.
Yeah, that's convenient.
Yes, it is convenient.
Now, this dialogue is the opposite of realistic. It's completely meta and breaks the fourth wall by poking fun at how they're moving one address down the street in accordance to the change in the film's titles. And then they also tease the next film by showing 23 Jump Street is under construction. It's completely unreal, but it works, because this kind of dialogue is the kind that you can only really get away with when you're writing comedy. Now, if you're watching this, I assume that you yourself want to be a better writer. If so, then this is a book that you need to give a go. Stephen King's On Writing. I'm sure a lot of you know that right now I'm writing some novels behind the scenes, and I was told a number of years ago that the best way to learn is to teach, which is why I started The Closer Look in the first place, to improve my writing craft while helping others as well. Hopefully one day I'll be half the writer Stephen King is, but this book provides this fascinating insight into what it's like to be a fiction author, as well as providing a ton of tips on the craft for you to learn from. Simply put, if you want to write fiction in any form, Stephen King's On Writing is required reading material, or rather, listening material, because I can happily thank Audible for sponsoring today's video, the #1 place for you to get your audiobooks. The great thing about audiobooks is they let you optimize your time. Like, why drive a car to work when you can do that and listen to a gripping novel or self-help book all at the same time? Why listen to the boring teacher at school when you can be lost in the lands of Narnia and escape to somewhere far more interesting? I personally think that Audible is a fantastic service. Listening to audiobooks has never been more easy or convenient, and when you start, I thoroughly recommend you give Stephen King's On Writing a go, especially if you're a writer like me. So if you go to my URL, audible.com/closerlook, or text closer look to 500 500, you get this audiobook or any other audiobook you like for no cost. Maybe tomorrow on your daily commute, or hell, this very second if you like, you can listen to this book on Audible using my link, and if you don't like the service, you can always cancel within the first month and it won't cost you a single penny. There truly is nothing on the line when you sign up, which means there's no reason you shouldn't give it a go. So please, go to my URL, audible.com/closerlook, or text closerlook to 500 500 and get your free audiobook today. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.